All right, guys, I'm spilling the dirty, dark secrets of e-commerce. In today's video, we're going to go over all of the cheat codes in e-commerce in 2025 that most of the big brands don't want you guys to know. No one actually speaks about any of this stuff publicly, but your boy Ecom Moose got you covered. Your boy Ecom Moose is going to spill it all. Everyone's going to hate me that's already beyond this and using these methods. Everyone that isn't using it, you guys are going to get a lot of value in today's video. So let's jump right into the secrets. All right, guys, secret number one, I'm sure a lot of you guys can guess, is run a subscription-based business model. This is probably the biggest unlock I've ever had in my entire e-commerce career, is understanding the difference between a subscription-based business versus just a one-time purchase-based business. And context for me is that I spent most of the early stages of my e-commerce career selling one-off products, making profit on day one, usually still withholding between 15 to 20% profit margins on that, and doing all of my scale on new customer acquisition. So this was probably the biggest mistake in hindsight, now understanding what I know about subscription-based businesses, because this just changes the whole dynamic of the entire business model. And I'm going to break down some of the next component, which is actually understanding how to utilize the data and the numbers, which is the thing that I think most people get wrong, even if you are running this model. So I guess first point on number one is a subscription-based business. A lot of you guys are probably already running it. So I'm going to show you guys how to amplify it. For the people that aren't running a subscription-based business, I'm going to show you at a high level why this is super important. And I speak about this on a lot of my videos, so I don't want to go too in depth on all this, because literally my last video is just breaking down the whole premise of the model. But let me show you guys a few really important points. Point number one is that this pretty much allows you to spend 2 to 3x on your CAC. So your CAC can literally go up by, if I'm willing to spend $50 on cost of acquiring a customer, I can probably spend between $100 to $150 using this business model. Because the main point of it, which I explained in my last video, is that with this model, your optimal point is to try to break even within 90 days. And with a subscription model, the big difference is assuming, let's just say someone buys your product and they opt into the subscription program. Let's just say 100% of new customers are becoming subscribers to the program. What starts to happen is that compounding effect of the next month's over. So month one, let's just say it's 60% of customers that will renew that subscription and actually pay for the following month. Now you're pretty much recouping all those sales from month one and adding an additional 60% of revenue from that same cohort. Whereas if you're doing a one-time purchase, that revenue wouldn't exist. Now, same thing happens on month two. Let's just say it's 30% renew on month two. Now you're making the same additional 30% boost on your revenue from what you had on that initial cohort of customers. Month three, let's just say it's 20% now. Same thing's happening. And let's just say that continues to happen month over month. And eventually most of the customers will unsubscribe from the program, but you're still making all that additional revenue all the way over from there, where now if you can figure out how to start to calculate all those numbers, you can start to bake that into your CAC. So the golden ratio is really your 90-day LTV. So based on that 90-day LTV, let's say your initial AOV is $40. This is the example we used in the last video. And let's say within 90 days, your LTV goes to $90. So now instead of using this initial $40 AOV to try to determine what your cost of acquisition could be, you could start to use this $90 LTV within your 90-day window to try to determine how much you can spend on your cost of acquisition. So this is a massive cheat code, because now I'm literally able to spend, because on this one, I might have to do a 2 ROAS, but on this one, in the last video, as I broke down, you could do a 0.6 ROAS, because on that $90, we're okay with breaking even. So I can break down all the math. The last video breaks down how all that math comes together. But for what you just need to understand is pretty much the difference is, if I didn't use a subscription model, I would have to scale it to 2 ROAS. Now I can scale it to 0.6 ROAS, which just makes everything infinitely easier, because now it's when I'm thinking about creatives, when I'm thinking about Facebook, when I'm thinking about my funnel and my conversion rate, all that is based on these numbers versus these numbers, where this you have to be the top 0.00001% of marketers to be able to sustain this on a consistent basis and do the kind of numbers like $100,000 a day, $200,000 a day all year round, right? There's a lot of people that could do it one-off. You have a really good day here, a really good day there. But to be able to run this consistently at a high level, this is really where I think the elite people are. Whereas this is an extreme example, 0.6. Like usually it won't be that. Usually it'll probably be like a 1 ROAS to maybe somewhere in the lines of a 1.5 ROAS, where that target can be. Even a 1.5 ROAS, you're still doing pretty well if you can pace that all year round. And of course, take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt, because this is all relative to your product, to the cost of goods, to all the other variables, like whether a 1 ROAS is good or a 1.5 ROAS is good. So that's less relevant. But the point is here, you're going to be able to have a much lower return on ad spend objective or a much higher CAC allowance to then be able to go and acquire your customers. So that's what the biggest cheat code is that comes with running a subscription program, is that now you have the ability to spend much more in acquiring a customer, and the person that can spend the most to acquire a customer ultimately will win, because it doesn't matter how good of a marketer you are. If you put the best marketer in the world versus someone that can spend 10 times more than that marketer, the person that can spend 10 times more than the best marketer in the world is going to end up winning. So this is the thing that really gives you the biggest lift, is actually changing the fundamentals of your business model to trying to incorporate a subscription, or if not a subscription, some form of predictable lifetime value that can come with your customer. So either have some strong post-purchase flows and sequences where you have accommodating products that people can get benefits for, or being able to front load a lot of that AOV. Because the other way to do this, doesn't have to necessarily be subscription, and I've spoke about this in some other videos as well, is if my product is $40 AOV, but let's say I can figure out a bundling system where instead of buying 1 unit, I try to pre-sell either 3 or maybe even 6 units, which is very common in the supplement space. And let's just say that maybe I even go higher than that. Maybe I even give people the option for 9 units or 12 units. And on all of those additional units, I give them cheaper cost on the actual cost of this. So let's say they buy 6 of these, but at 6, I give it to them at, let's just say, $20 a unit. But now I'm making 120 because that's times 6, right? Versus that initial $40. And let's just say I get 50% of people to opt in for this versus this offer. And now my blended AOV goes somewhere in the lines of $80, maybe that same $90. Now I'm figuring out a way to front load all of that, where, that $90 AOV, I'm getting that now upfront pretty much at that $80 because I figured out the right positioning and the right offer framing. So now I can start to scale a lot more aggressive. But the biggest hack is actually doing both of these together, right? Because if I can figure out a way to front load a lot of the cost, but then also figure out how to do subscription based on those different bundle tiers that people are actually buying, now I'm getting the benefits of both of these, where still I might be okay with breaking even within that 90-day window in the ideal circumstances, right? And I have that higher AOV to front load the cost. Now that's a cheat code to being able to scale. So that's a mini cheat code within this one. But overall, it's more about having more revenue from the additional customer, whether that's through your average order value or through your lifetime value, and ideally the 90-day lifetime value, because that's more of a sustainable window to be able to scale. That's cheat code number 1. Cheat code number 2 is actually being able to maximize the benefits from cheat code number 1, which is understanding the numbers and how to actually look at this, which I have a lot of people in my DMs that try to talk to me about this type of stuff, and so many people just don't understand how this model actually works. So I'm going to try to unlock a few of these secrets for you guys so that you guys can get some really good takeaways of actionable insights that you can do around this model. So let's start with the base numbers that you should actually be looking at on a daily basis. So I'm going to write them out, and then I'm going to tell you how to actually look at this. So NCPA or NCAC, it can be either one of those, NAOV, and then NMER. Okay, so let's go over what each of these metrics actually are. So NCPA is the cost of acquisition, your CAC, but on new customers, right? So that's what the little N in the front stands for. It's new customer acquisition cost. Then this one is new customer average order value that you're getting. And then this one is, this just looks like a ball of shit over here, but what it is NMER. So MER is just the efficiency ratio. It's the same thing as return on ad spend as a way to think about it, just to make it simple. And that's pretty much your new customer return on ad spend. So all you're doing is taking your NAOV divided by your N cost of acquisition, and that's going to give you your NMER, okay? Now, these are the most important numbers because now you don't, when you're trying to do things based on a subscription program, your objective is to acquire new customers, right? So if you're getting a former customer or a returning customer to then buy the product again on the front end or something along those lines, that is going to skew a lot of your data. So what you need to understand is new customers that bring into the program, because then you could start to look at it based on the metrics that actually matter, which again, I spoke about this in the last video. So let's go a little bit deeper though onto these different numbers. So One is the opt-in rate. So what's the percentage of customers that when they come to your website are opting into your subscription program? Number two is the month one retention, then the month two retention, and then the month three retention, and then so on from here, right? But these 3 months are the most important because this makes up your 90-day LTV, which we just spoke about. And these are going to be the numbers that you want to optimize the most. So let's just say, for the sake of this example, let's just say this is 50. Let's say this is 60. Let's say this is 30. And then let's say this is 10 on month three. And then beyond that, we're looking at these different numbers as they go. So the way that you'd want to look at these different things is what is your biggest leak in your subscription funnel, which in this case, it would be this number, because this is on all people that are on your website. You're only getting 50% of the people to actually opt into your subscription program. And if you're trying to base your whole business model, like what we said, the cheat code being a subscription-based business, you need to have much more than 50% of people actually join the program. So I would say like the minimum that you should really be aiming for is 80%. And the way to get at 80%, there's a lot of different ways to do it. So one, which I talk a lot about, is the Rise business model, where pretty much all new customers, you're sending them to a page where the only option they have is to subscribe. Now, obviously, if it's not framed correctly, then people might not want to subscribe into your program. So your conversion rate can go down if it's not framed correctly, if the offer is not good enough. So if that doesn't work after doing split testing, then you can do the other models of pretty much having a one-time purchase button, but giving people the ability. You can then have the subscribe and save option or the one-time purchase. But the subscribe and save, you have to start to test around the offer, like what percentage offer, giving more compelling gifts around it. So there's a lot of different things that you can do, but this is pretty much the gold standard of where you want to be at least. Now, ideally, you can even get it to like 95%, all the way up to 100%. 100% is not really so typical if you have people to have the option. So between here and 95% is where you're going to need to be to make this model sustainable for the opt-in rate of people to join the subscription program and actually rely on this as your business model. And then between each of these months, what you're going to have to do is look at where is the biggest drop off. So 60%, I think you could probably aim to get this between 70 to 80% as a good benchmark. So that's what I would try to focus on next. And then from here, I would try to look at where is the biggest dip. It's pretty much going to always be between month 2 and 3. And then even on so on, maybe you see that there's also a huge spike and dip on month 6. So the more data that you start to collect, the more that you'll start to understand on these different cohorts. But then your job is just really to figure out how to optimize it. So let's talk about some cheat codes going back into these different months. I'll tell you guys just 3 really good ones that you can start to look at. So pretty much you should look at the data of wherever you have the biggest drop off, like we said. And then based on this, you should try to bribe your customers. So a way to bribe your customers is to give them free gifts at, let's say, month 3, which we see over here is a huge dip at that 10%. I might give them a free gift of a relevant product that doesn't interfere with my subscription program, but that will be still perceived high value if they make it to month 3. So that's one really good example of something that you could do. Another thing is it's not only the free gifts, but it's also making sure that people understand the benefits that they're going to get the longer that they stay in the program. If I'm selling a green supplement, I should keep on emphasizing, let me use actually a hair growth supplement. I should keep emphasizing that if they stop using the hair growth supplement by 6 months, they're not going to actually see any of the results. And all of the work that they did in those previous 3 months, they're not going to actually see the progress of if they cancel the subscription now. So it's tying in those benefits and also the pain of what happens if they get off of the subscription, plus bribing them with those free gifts. Those are 2 really powerful things that you can do to get people to stay. I could do a whole video on different things that you could do, and I probably will at some point. But those are a few really good things that if you start to figure out strategic ways to implement into this program, you're going to start to see massive improvements in those different cohorts. So these are the numbers that actually start to matter way more than even your front-end CAC, is just figuring out the small incremental boosts that you can do on each of these months and really trying to always think about how you can get the improvements to be at the numbers that they need to be at. So all of that comes together, tying back to these points over here. And sorry for flip-flopping on a lot of different stuff, but this is contextual to making this all make sense, is based on all of these, you're going to start to understand what your actual target NCPA will be. So your new customer CAC. So the better that these numbers are, the more that you can start to spend on your new customer acquisition. Because if you remember what I said, is your whole goal is you want to be able to break even within 90 days, right? So if we talk about the $90 point, where let's just say that's your LTV within 90 days, and let's just say your break even, for the sake of this example, let's change the numbers around a little bit, is 1.3. That means right now your target CAC could be $70 on that. But as you start to boost these numbers in these different cohorts, right? Let's say we go from 60 to 70% here, and 30 to 50% here, and 10 to 30% here. What's going to happen is this LTV number is actually going to go up, maybe all the way up to 120, right? That's definitely possible. So now that same break-even number will actually probably go lower, because what you have to understand too is on that boosted revenue, you're not paying for additional ad spend. So that's all much more profit. So instead of a 1.3, it might go down to a 1.2. So that 120 divided by 1.2 might actually take you up $30 in CAC. So you might get that 1-to-1 ratio even of now you can spend $100 rather than that $70 because you increase these different cohorts. So really one of the biggest ways to improve this is actually giving yourself more room to be able to spend more on CAC on the front end by optimizing the back end. More so than like your creatives or the other stuff that people talk about. It's really getting these numbers dialed in so that you can start to afford more and more money to be able to then acquire customers. That's where this number comes in. Now, your new customer AOV, there's a lot of different ways that you can improve this. So this is going to be not your 90-day numbers, but this is going to be how much you're maximizing on the front end. So again, there's a lot of ways which I spoke about in some other videos, but just think about all of the ways that you can increase that revenue. So one is the offer itself. So it's like the bundle example that I gave a little bit earlier. So maybe sell 1, 3, and 6 units. And if someone buys 3 units, you let them go on if it's 3, right, let's just say that's for 3 months, you put them on a subscription for 3 months rather than having them on a recurring bill, because then that's going to affect your cohort here. Probably a lot of people will cancel the subscription because you're giving them 3 bottles and then expecting them to want it on the next month. That's not going to work as well. So same thing with the 6 bottles, right? But all those together to help boost that initial AOV. It could be other things like, on the cart, when people are going to check out, what are some accommodating products that will make sense with that first product? Even on the checkout itself, you could have one-click add-ons that can make sense. And then, of course, there's the post-purchase sequence, your upsells, your downsells. I'm assuming if you're watching this video up to this point, you're a little bit more advanced. So hopefully you understand a lot about those things. But you really try to continuously optimize those different surrounding offers around your core offer to make sure that people are spending as much money as possible on that first purchase. And that together is going to give you your NMER and making it as efficient as possible to actually being able to scale. And as you're scaling, you're not just scaling now based on that front end NMER, but you're actually scaling based on your 90-day LTV more so. And you're understanding how these numbers will all come together. Now, a few points to mention on all of this is that you're breaking even, right, which is what we were speaking about here. So the breaking even and doing that within 90 days, this is the gold standard. This is not where you're going to start. I want to really give a hard emphasis on this because this is something that I'm not even doing in my business yet. I'm not even at the point where I'm breaking even at 90 days. We're actually still making money on day one when you account for Amazon and different elements. And kind of the thing that we're trying to do is moving everything out to this window to be able to sustain it. But it becomes a huge conflict with cash flow to actually being able to do this, which makes it a lot more complex. You might start at 60 days, or you might start at 30 days, or you might start at breaking even just on your Facebook ROAS, right? So there's a lot of different layers that comes before actually getting to this point and scaling to this golden window. But this is where the gold standard is. So that's what I just want to mention on that point. Other thing that I want to mention is that this is only sustainable if you have cohorts that are still lasting. Ideally, within the 12-month time frame, you can still recoup 20% of your subscribers. Now, this is very difficult to do. This is a golden standard of a subscription-based business, is after 12 months, still having 20% of that initial cohort remain. But you have to make sure that you understand these numbers and at least you still have a percentage after 12 months, because everything after that break even within the 90-day window starts to become, let's just say on month 4 over here, which we're talking about. So let's say these numbers are much better. And on month 4, you're still recouping 20% of the cohort. If you're at these numbers, this 20% is literally going to be pure profit. If on month 5, you're now still retaining 18%, that's going to be pure profit. And what's really nice about this model is that after the first 3 months, these numbers actually start to drop much less. Usually it's much less percentages than these huge dips you're going to see in the first 3 months, because these are people that are now actually invested. They're actually bought into the program ideally, and you're going to start to get much more profit. So this is how this whole thing starts to actually become super profitable if you actually run the whole model out. So that's a long-winded way to say understanding your numbers and how this all comes together. But going back to these points, just to tie this whole thing home, you're not looking for just returning customers with regular customers, with different types of customers that aren't going into the subscription program. What you're specifically looking for are new customers that are going to be entering your subscription program, and understanding all these different numbers of how you can determine what your target, really NCPA, is going to be based on where your new customer AOV stands on all those optimizations you do, and understanding how much you can spend based on how far out you're willing to extend your break-even window, and how all those numbers on the back end actually allow you to sustain, ideally as high as possible, front-end cost of acquisition. So all those come together to allow you to run this model. Then point number 3, which is a cheat code that I didn't start doing till way later on in my e-commerce journey, is actually setting out projections around all of these numbers. I'm just going to keep this more theory rather than going into an actual spreadsheet to show you guys how to do it. But just so you understand how this all comes together, is once you start to have all of these numbers in place, first off, you're running a subscription program. Second off, you actually understand how much you can afford mainly to acquire a customer based on your NAOV and based on what your target MER is. And just, a side note that just came to my head as I mentioned that is, typically you're going to want to either do all of your optimizations based on this or based on this, because this will really depend on how much your NAOV adjusts. So if you're doing like a bundle type of offer like what I just mentioned, then the chances are on a daily basis, your average order value is probably going to fluctuate a ton, which means that your CAC on one day isn't going to be the same CAC that you actually need on the next day. So that's going to change a ton. So then you probably want to do most of your optimizations based on just an NMER projection so that you can keep it more stable based on these different fluctuations. The only way you really want to use CAC as your primary objective is if you know your NAOV is going to be pretty stable, it's pretty frequent no matter what the day is, then it becomes much more sustainable to use your CAC. But based on this, what you want to do is now start setting projections once you start to understand your numbers. So the way that I do this, and again, I'm going to keep this more theory, but the first thing I do is I review my data from the previous week. And actually, there's 2 different types of projections. One, actually more, but we'll call it long-term versus short-term, right? We'll do short-term. So long-term is you should know what your projections are for like a year in advance, maybe even sometimes 3 years in advance. I'm not at that level where I'm doing 3 years in advance, but I'm trying to definitely plot out a year in advance, a quarter in advance, and then a month in advance, right? So this could be longer term. And then short-term is really like on a week-to-week basis, a day-to-day basis. That's like more of the short-term projection. For the long-term projections, that's a whole nother concept, but it's really plotting everything out on a longer-term horizon based on how things will grow and taking in all numbers into consideration. So I'm not going to go so much into that right now because that's probably its own video. If you guys want me to make a video on that, comment below. So I want to make sure that there's actually demand for it before spending time on that. But for short-term projections, the way that I do it is pretty much each week I'm reviewing the data of where we paced on the previous month. And really the main things that I'm trying to plot out is how much money am I going to spend on each channel? And based on that spend, what I'm doing is I'm trying to plot this out for, first off, overall spend and then individual channels. So the main channels that we're using is Meta, we have Google, we have Amazon. So there's these different channels which we're all going to be spending individually on these different channels. And then we're trying to see how much is going to be the total spend between all of these different channels. And then also the total new customer revenue that we're going to be making between these different channels. So we use Hyros right now to track all of these different numbers for us. It's probably one of the better ones that I've used in the ad platforms directly to be able to actually see what these numbers look like. But what we're trying to see is like, what's the blended approach to this going to be to actually being able to get the numbers that we're setting and projecting to actually be able to get on a weekly basis. So we're reviewing how much we spend and how much things have been pacing from the previous week. And then based on that, making logical conclusions to how much we're going to be able to spend on the current week between these different channels, assuming things are pretty stable and relevant. All within, ideally, the different targets that we have on the amount we're willing to spend to acquire a customer, the amount that we're anticipating the average order value to be, and thus what that MER will be. So obviously there's, I can go much deeper into what this is, but the point, just to keep this, not too long and drawn out on this, is you should set projections on a week-to-week basis based on actually knowing what your numbers are and stick to these projections. That's just going to make everything so much easier, especially for planning how much inventory you're going to need to order, planning just the overall cash flow and expenses that you're going to have, understanding how much revenue and what numbers are going to be coming in, making sure that you're pacing out to, those longer term projections, where the big thing that comes with all this is that this just looks like a big fucking doodle board over here. But over here, what starts to happen is your monthly recurring revenue is going to start to grow every single month. And that means your profits are probably going to be 6 months, maybe up to 12 months away. Your cash flow, your free cash flow, and your profits, especially if you do the model where you're breaking even within 90 days. So plotting this out long-term just starts to become essential, and making sure that you're plotting within projections is going to be the only way that you can actually sustain this model and make the whole thing work. So these are going to be, we'll keep it at these for right now on the cheat codes to running an e-commerce business within 2025. Throw in one more bonus tip over here is just multi-channel. Okay. So what I mean by multi-channel is if you have all of these different things in place, right? So assuming that 1, you're running a subscription program, 2, you actually understand the numbers and how to maneuver this subscription program, and 3, you're setting up projections every single month, then one of the coolest things that you can start to do is finding new channel opportunities where you have a lot of arbitrage. So I'll tell you why this is super cool. Let's go to a clean space on this board. So what happens is, let's say in this example, we're saying that you now can spend $100 on CAC, right? And your product costs you, the AOV, somewhere, let's just like $40 from that crazy example that we were just giving. So you're in a position where you can literally spend 2.5, I don't know what the actual number is on this, but whatever amount more than what your base AOV is on a new customer. So in this position, it makes it way more likely that you can get a channel to actually work, especially harder channels to crack. You could think about maybe native ads. You could think about Google ads and different forms of Google ads where maybe you would have more difficulty cracking it. YouTube ads, all these different types of channels that might have been much tougher for you to crack, where now you actually have the feasibility to make that work. And the cool thing is on a lot of these channels is if you get it to work, there's a lot more extended reach and incrementality that you can have outside of just Meta, because there's different buyers and different people on each of these individual channels, where now it makes it a lot more easy for you to be able to become multi-channel and get so much leverage from these other channels and not as reliant on one channel like Facebook, for example, which most of you guys probably are. So that's what starts to happen as you can start to scale this thing, is once you know these numbers and you know how much you can afford, you have a much better chance of scaling on these different channels, cracking it, and potentially even finding, maybe you'll find on native, you can afford $80 versus what you were spending on Meta, and then get so much more scale out of there as opposed to that. And I know that happens for a lot of different businesses actually on this specific example. So what starts to happen with all this is that you just have a lot more leverage because you have a subscription program. You can afford to spend way more on customers. You know your numbers and you know how much you can afford. You know how much time it's going to take for you to get paid back. And you have a plan that's oriented around all this. So now you're cracking into other channels. So all this is the cheat codes that I wanted to spill for e-commerce in 2025. This is stuff that very few people actually know. And I bet you this video is going to have very few views as well. So the few of you guys that actually watch this, hopefully you guys start to understand this and figure out how you can implement all these different points to the full extent. If you guys liked it, please subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to grow my personal brand. I'm not selling anything. So the only thing I would ask in return is if you guys could subscribe, like this video even. And if you guys have any questions, I'm hopping in here to answer a lot of these questions. So drop some in the comments, and appreciate you guys tuning in as always, and check in for the next one. I'm going to try to post 2 videos a week going forward. So be tuned in, subscribe, and you guys will be able to catch those videos right as they launch.